interview series. Today I'm going to be talking to David Edelman, who is a author and educator. He's otherwise known as the People's Lawyer. We're going to be looking at a little bit about law. David, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Richard. Total pleasure to be here.
It's so nice to talk to you because I was reading in a book that we've been talking to the authors Gloria Moss and Catherine Armitage recently, in this book called Light Bulb Moments and the Power of Critical Thinking. And there's a piece about you which I believe you probably wrote and submitted to the book. And it talks about you as the people's lawyer, educating people in, well, you're going to correct me, I know this. I thought you were educating people in common law and how to get out of difficult situations that might arise. So it's possible that I often make mistakes, so I put my hand up to that. But I thought you'd be an interesting person to talk to because we've been talking about constitution, we've been talking about natural law, God's law, common law, those sort of things. And you, I think, are a lawyer, but you don't so much give advice, but you educate people on different aspects of law. Is that right?
It is right, but it's law that I've basically self-educated myself on, because my original training, which was in the law as the system presents it, which is not true law, didn't really give me much grounding in how to protect people really from tyrannical systems.
Right.
So since, in particular, the CV19 issue, I don't know how much you want to allow me to name it by name, but let's call it the CV19 issue. There's been a massive upsurge in interest in freedom, all things freedom and all things protection against tyranny. I had been studying the law for some...
So I can't pull out the, I can't work the cropper and the camera and the pointer and everything all at the same time, but I'm going to just point out timeline, these are the timelines that we were been looking at, timeline, this big one right here. I know it's very jiggy-jaggy, but these are the ones that I'm first learning about and everything. I mean, there's so many of them coming out of here, but those are, you know, they're all over the fucking place. Yeah.
Sometime before CV19, and basically when it happened, there was a call from my friends and associates to say, David, you need to put your knowledge into action, get out on the streets and evolve your course, because I was already giving a course. It started out as a come to my house course, and then it evolved into a Zoom call course. And it's designed to help people really clear their heads on who they are, because the system has made our heads really fuzzy and taken away all our sense of self and who we are. So it's not so much that I teach the common law, because the common law, as has been handed down to us, is in suspension until further notice, until we the people reassert it. You can only assert it by not engaging with the system. So you'd be asserting, in effect, common sense, the knowledge of who you are, and keeping just out of range of the tentacles of the beast. Yeah. That's the secret. And I have a job on my hands because people have been trained in their schooling, and I did watch your schooling, your education show yesterday. Found it fascinating, because I have a current talk about that, because although I am the people's lawyer, I started out before CV19 as the people's educator, which is where I came into that book that you've just mentioned,
right,
on critical thinking, because although they put me in the law section, they could equally have put me in the education section. It is all about re-educating and, above all, unlearning all the lies and virtually everything we've ever been told by anyone is false.
Yes, this is a huge thing to comprehend, because when you believe the image of the world that you've created over time, it's very difficult to suddenly say actually all of that is just theatre. How do you yeah? So
Alright,
how do you approach turning what is real into reality when there must be a lot of prejudice and a lot of pushback from people who are.
Alright, so I'll put the cropper back up to him in a minute, but to get his eye in better, bring the shadows in. But eye, nose, mouth. I'm going to give them to you in two different ways. One of them is going to be real and deep here. I'm going to just go only to his goatee, but notice the hair comes up around his ear. I'm going to get you this one first, where the timeline is right here. Okay, I'm going to get you that one first, but then we're going to look at another one. Just hold on.
Going, no, you know, I know that this must be the situation because I've lived it and been in it, and you know, it is what it is.
Well, Larkin Rose, the presenter in America, divides people up into statists and voluntarists.
Okay.
Some people are born with a propensity to trust their government, their nanny state, their teachers, their doctors, their
That's
lawyers, their
one
dentists,
timeline, and
etc.
then there's another one right up to
That's
his
the
other
vast
eye.
majority. And the
So
beauty
one.
of no, I nearly said the
One
word
right there.
CV19.
They're all over the place
So,
from here.
yeah.
All these are timelines.
The
but
beauty of that is that
these
it
big dark ones.
awakened many people
So
to the
one.
fact that perhaps
I gotta get his
statism is
face
not the
back.
best way to go.
Right there.
Now, I had a privileged upbringing in the sense that I always had a skepticism of all things state-run,
There's the
all
first
things
one.
institutional.
You see his
And
eyeballs?
it wasn't that I knew anything that nobody else did, it was just more of a hunch. And
His
then,
eyeball's way back
and then
here.
it led me to
Look
leave
way
the
back
legal
here. There's one
profession
eyeball
very early. I
for
was
this,
still only in my
for this image
mid-20s.
that's going to first go with this one.
Go on a journey of self-definition.
See it?
So I've been defining my own life for a very, very, very long
See
time.
the cut lines?
So when it came to responding to
See the timeline?
CV19
Watch. There's one
and
here.
living a life which
I'll
had
try
no
to stay on it with my
restrictions on
stick.
it,
Hold
it was
on.
easy for me because I've been living my own life for so long. I didn't
Right
have
here.
anyone breathing down my neck threatening to divorce
Right.
me or
And it might even
evict
go this
me
way around his
or,
goatee. I don't
or
know.
do anything untoward
So that's one.
that would put me off, that would coerce me
And
back
then-
into my place as a good little slave.
Hmm.
Now, alluding
Then you
to
got
something that you
this
just
eye
said
with
is
this eye.
for some people who have taken on marriage, children,
Using this
mortgage,
nose
cars, career,
And this mouth.
it's not so
Got
easy, and we have
This
to
eye
be
with that
a little
eye.
bit more patient and understanding with people
Got
like
'em?
those
That's a
because
different image.
they are walking
Then
through
you
treacle.
got this eye
And
with this eye.
you know,
And the
the best
forehead
we
comes
can do
over
is
further.
say, all right, stop what you're doing, don't walk any further, don't go backwards, just stand still and have a think.
Okay, and then I'm going to come
And-
out a
and-
little bit.
I mean, one of the things that I found, somebody said to me very early on,
So I wanna give
he
you
said,
this
just
other one,
entertain some of the ideas that
he's
you're going
gonna be
to discover. Don't put your
right
ego
there,
in that shuts it down. Just
where-
entertain them, let them stay there so that you're not
Again,
saying
bald
yes or
head.
no, but you're just able to think about things,
You can use that eye with
Which-
that eye.
often go against what you know or have believed all your life. And then
this
you start
turns out to be his beard. His mouth is
let
over
that
here.
percolate in
Here's
as you
the
start
next
to
one.
make a judgment. Well, actually,
Let me see if I can
is
get him.
that
There
true?
you
Is
go.
that not true? Or where?
There you
How
go.
do I feel about it without shutting down an
then
argument
his
straight
mouth
away?
moves over to
I found
here.
that a very useful
Same nose.
technique to just say, okay, I'm just going to entertain
Bald
it. I'm
head
just going
still.
to accept that that is a potential thing.
And I'm
I'm not
sure
gonna
I
say
can
yes
get a
or
better
no.
angle of him. But
So that worked for me. Now, have you been? I mean, I'm self-employed, and I've been self-employed pretty much all my life. So when you talk about people with,
I don't know, 'cause I'm
who are
looking at it
married
sideways
and
too,
they're
so-
in jobs
but anyways,
and things like
that's
that, it's you're taking on a lot of other people's philosophy as well as yourself. Whereas I've been pretty much independent and able to go, actually, do you know what? I just don't, I don't get involved with the state. So to take us through, perhaps an approach that you would to somebody who is coming to you in some state and you're trying to educate them? What
Just gonna make mention this moon that we're looking at here on the screen is from the Clayton Morris series, part 100, on the Michael Oziak channel. Trying to go over some timelines, and the first video I just did before this one, I was matching up the timelines, and this is it's just gonna be easy. I got it.
where do we start with this?
Well, I use the power of the question. I used to use the power of the exclamation, and then I soon realised that that just doesn't work. It just raises their heckles, their defences, and creates barriers and obstacles. Because I don't have that deferential tone of voice that would make people think that how can I put it? It's kind of sometimes there's a tone of sarcasm in me that just rears its ugly head, and I find I get people's backs up. So what I do is I ask relevant questions, and in particular, now that I'm doing talks, and I have been doing for some time, I give people, my audience, who are either awake or waking up, a sample of questions that I would ask given the opportunity. Now, there are so many people who are so close-minded, mainly because they've been to school where their minds were shut down, their brains were closed off to all things mystical and all things quantum and all things full of human potential, that people's minds are so closed down that it's actually not very likely that someone's going to come to me anymore, or to you, and say, I'm really confused, please help. In fact, I don't remember the last time it happened, to be quite honest. So all you can do is put information out there on your social media, drop the odd leaflet in places. And I remember 3 years ago, me and a graphic artist created a CV19 questionnaire, and it was it had lovely sort of teenage visuals. It was done like a sort of allegory, you know, with some of the imagery was reminiscent of the Garden of Eden. Some of it was, you know, it was very pictorial. So you have to make people keep them relaxed, entertain them as you, that's the word you used, and use above all the question and humour. So what I've tried to do in the last year or two is outgrow my sarcasm, which is based in, I can't believe that they don't know this, or that they don't even want to know this, and use irony rather than sarcasm, and therefore don't alienate them, don't make them think that I'm a potential enemy. It's still hard work, because when someone is shut down and you start talking what I would simply call common sense, you can see it's like they go, it's their eyes glaze over, they look down at the ground, and you can tell that they cannot wait for you to either A, shut up, or B, walk away.
I love that part.
And it's not easy.
So true.
And I think you're absolutely right there, because I've noticed if I'm talking to somebody about something that I found out about and I feel passionate about sharing because I think it's for the good of the nation, sort of thing, and I'm talking one-to-one, you get that feeling that, oh, I'm now saying something which is almost beyond their ability to accept, and I need to stop, because it would be too easy to keep adding and adding to try and convince them. But actually, if I do that, they've shut down even further. Whereas a question, and this is why my channel started to get busy with viewers, because I was saying, why is it the government are doing this, and why would they, if they're there for us, be doing this? And I would just let the audience answer the questions, and of course that was actually educating me at the same time. So it was a very useful tool. You mentioned common sense. Can you explain what you mean by, because before we recorded, I said to you, can we talk about common law? And you said to me, well, I don't call it common law, I call it common sense. So could you explain a bit about what you mean by common sense? What is the common sense that you would say that is what you live by?
Well, let me give you a recent example of, I think the guy's name is Matt Walsh, and he's a documentary maker in the States.
Oh, yeah.
And he went to one of the African countries because there is a current woke conundrum about the identity of being able to define what a woman is. And he went to, I can't remember, I won't say which country it is because I honestly can't remember it, but he was interviewing the locals there, the native to that country, and he was asking them what they, how they would define a woman. And they looked at him as if he was absolutely insane.
Mm.
And they simply said to him, well, if you don't know what a woman is, we can't really take you very seriously. And this is a classic example that Western society has lost the plot when it comes to common sense. And we shouldn't really even need to be having these conversations about what a woman is, because common sense would tell us. We shouldn't need to be wearing masks because common sense would tell us that that's only for someone who's working on a building site that doesn't want to inhale dust. We shouldn't be taking jabs because we don't know what's in them. So we don't even need to know what's in them. All we need to know is that we don't know what's in them. So why would we put something in our blood when we don't know what the contents of the injection are? So these are little common sense tips, tricks, and hacks, which are based in primordial survival need and primordial
amazing,
knowing, which runs through our heart, basically, and both parts of our brain. But at school, they ignore, I say in my talks that they essentially ignore the four main brains, which is head, left brain, head, right brain, heart brain, and gut brain. And 3 out of those 4 brains are completely
got a neck in there again, too, in this
neglected,
direction.
and only one tiny part of the left brain in the head is used. So common sense comes from the judicious use of all those 4 brains. And schooling is deactivating the use of those brains. And a question that I would ask to highlight the lack of common sense in current thinking is something, again, I feature in my talk, is about carbon dioxide. And I simply ask,
see what I mean about a scene?
Is carbon dioxide a pollutant, or is it a nutrient, a life-giving nutrient? Now, all you need is a little, you don't need to be a scientist. You just need a little modicum of common sense to know that it's the gas of life.
Yeah.
No carbon, no life, no humanity.
What's
This
interesting
is what I mean by common sense.
Yes, and you start to wonder whether the sense that you say is it actually common anymore amongst us all, or whether these days it's a few people that seem to have this sense. It's almost now as if it's a rare thing. And on the gas of life business, I mean, if ever I do any talks about global warming and I mention not H2O, carbon dioxide, and I say it's the gas of life, and exactly along the lines of, is it a pollutant? And people will say, but water, if you have too much water, you'll drown. If you drink too much water, it's not good for you. It's about the degree, about how much you have. And so they start to muddy the water, so to speak, by bringing in other things. And you're saying, yeah, but is it a bad thing, full stop, or is it a good thing? Why do they pump CO2 into greenhouses so that they can grow tomatoes and other plants like that? Without it, they would not be as prosperous as they were, and we wouldn't have the crops that we have.
And when someone responds to our common sense with a spurious piece of nonsense, what they are doing is actually gaslighting us. And it features hugely in my current talks, because I don't want to, well, spoiler alert, folks, but the N word, narcissism, features very highly in my current talk, which is called From globalist control to sovereign freedom, which I'm going all around the country doing. And this is what happens when you talk to a narcissist. They will not allow you to win any perceived debate. They must have the last word, and they do feel better when you walk away feeling frustrated or thwarted in some way. So it's not an even playing field. We think that we're talking to people who are as very much as reasonable and as intelligent as we are, and very often that is just not the case. They may be as intelligent, but they are rarely as reasonable.
Yes, well, I can go along with that. You mentioned there from the globalist to sovereign freedom. Can you explain what you mean by sovereign freedom? I think we all know what globalists are and what they're trying to do, and people are sort of are beginning to understand that. It's the fact that there might be a way out of it, and what it actually might look like.
Well, in my talk, I described the essential difference between a sovereign and a slave. And I boil it down to slaves need permission while sovereigns do not. So if you feel that you need permission to do anything like watch TV, and in the world of commerce, permission is referred to as a license. If you feel that you need a license to drive, a license to watch TV, a license to do anything, a license to fish, whatever, then you have abdicated responsibility for your own life. You have surrendered sovereignty on that issue to an institution or a perceived higher authority, and you have, in effect, let yourself and the side down. And the side, of course, is sovereign humanity. And what this current period in history is going to allow us to do is to recover that sovereignty, initially as individuals, and then eventually as a collective. And when we realize that we don't need permission. For example, when you go to school, they are now teaching, and I think this came up in your talk yesterday, so I'm just reiterating what the young lady said, that you cannot say no and you cannot ask why.
Yeah, I mean, that's just absolutely awful.
So this requires an immense pushback, because if you cannot say no and you cannot ask why, then who are you? You're certainly not a sovereign. So if you're not a sovereign, there's no fence to sit on, you're a slave, one or the other.
And as a young person who has no experience and is growing up, and you're thrust into an institution that you've never asked to go, and you're being taught things you've never entered your head about, and you're suddenly being told this is how you've got to behave, you can't say no, you've got to obey, and it's as overt as that. It's very difficult for somebody who has no experience of life to push back against that. And if parents are ignorant of that as well, then there's no intervention. And as a parent, you're the guardian of your child and should be educating your child enough so that once they're of a certain age, that they can stand on their own and push back against people who are being overtly authoritarian to them. And that I think when we exposed that in the video yesterday, in the interview yesterday, I think that's had a huge effect on people thinking, bloody hell, that's not right. And clearly it isn't. But that asking for permission that we've indoctrinated our kids, and to an extent, a lot of us are like that, and we saw that during lockdown. How do you push back when it appears the full force of government and its authority, the police and all the sort of people in authority, doctors and mainstream media, are pushing out this one very solid message: you must, for example, in that case, take a jab, or you must stay inside, you must obey our law. How do you push back against that?
Okay, well, I'm going to give two answers to that question. It may turn into three, and I'm going to pull something out of the hat that is relevant, again, to your conversation on education that you had yesterday.
Thank you.
So the first thing I would say that you do to push back is to be yourself. And I'm going to give a very specific example of how I was myself at a certain key moment in time back in the so-called lockdown. I was giving a little speech, and it was a very little speech because I had an audience of about 3 or 4, and I was in Macclesfield in Cheshire, that I describe as arguably the nation's most evil town. And I hope they're watching because I want them to know that if they don't already. Now, why do I describe Macclesfield as the nation's most evil town? Well, I had rocked up with my little PA and a few friends, and I was giving them a little talk about the truth behind CV19, and in fact, that no one has ever isolated a virus, there's nothing to fear but fear itself, etc., etc. I had the day in question was known as Treacle Market Day, and nothing to do with treacle. It's just an ancient story about a horse that drops a cargo of treacle, and it turns out that that's the site that they have the market on. And so there was about 6 stall holders because it was lockdown, social distancing, and normally there's about 60 or 30. And there was hardly any customers because people were still frightened of going outside. And I rock up, and it's almost like a ghost town, and I start saying what I'm saying, and 1 or 2 of the stall holders come over to me and say, "You can't say that, you're killing our business." I said, "I beg your pardon." I said, "This is lockdown, you haven't got any business. I'm just here to give you a way out." And anyway, long story short, I had passers-by trying to pull out the cords from my PA system, and I had one particular stall holder come up to me, face up to me, take a close-up picture and says, "Next time you're in Macclesfield, I'll be waiting for you." So amid all this passive-aggressive, actually not that passive at all, nonsense, I then had a gaggle of officious, yellow-vested, high-vis vested council workers who came up to me and says, "Do you have a license to emit amplified sound?" And obviously I didn't, so we're back to license and permission. I just said to them, "No, I don't have a license, but I'm just speaking using a microphone and a speaker. But if you think that that's a legal problem, then I suggest you contact your legal department, who can then contact my legal department, and we can thrash this out using paperwork." In other words, that was my polite way of saying, you can piss right off.
Bug off.
I'm doing what I'm doing,
Yeah.
and I don't need your permission. Thank you. Now, we were in daylight hours, so nobody could argue that I was creating a public nuisance. And I was prepared to lower the volume just in case someone came out from a house saying, "I'm a shift worker, I'm trying to sleep, could you lower the volume?" And I would have done.
Yes.
And that's back to common sense. So, that was me basically being the change that I wish to see. So in other words, in answer to your question, step 1, be that sovereign who does not need permission. And I could talk... Sorry.
I was just going to interrupt there just to say, did they leave you alone at that
Of course,
point?
because they had no choice.
Right.
I gave them no choice because I challenged their fake authority. Their authority, going back to school, is simply based on our fear, trepidation, and ignorance. And that segues beautifully.
So that Disney image is coming out right now. I think I'll be able to give her to you. Let's see.
Onto the second point that I want to make, is that I have devised a remedy to take into schools. Now, there's all kinds of remedy for different situations, but I just want to focus on schools because that's where my heart is.
Maybe the next turn.
And the remedy that people can take into schools comes in 3 parts, and it's encapsulated on a card known as the school protection card. Because I'm thinking that, okay, I've spent the last 2 or 3 years endeavouring to empower adults, and I feel like sometimes I'm flogging a dead horse because either they're going to be empowered anyway, in which case they don't really need my help, or they're too statist and too locked into the system, and it's just, I'm getting nowhere fast. And then I thought, well, hang on, why don't I turn my attention, which was originally my focus when I was more like the people's educator, and author of a book called School No Place for Children, which is mentioned in the book that you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
And why don't I amalgamate these two worlds, bring them together, see what I can come up with? And what I did come up with was something called the school protection card. Right, how does this work? You give the card to the boy or girl, and you say to the boy or girl, they would have to be at least late primary, so age 10 probably, and say to the boy or girl, now then, I would like to take you out of school, but mummy or daddy is objecting, or I'm the only mummy or dad you have or caregiver, and I have to work, and so we have to keep sending you to school. We don't want to, but we have to for now. Because let's face it, the common sense remedy is just to deregister the boy and or girl, and that's the end of that. So you give them a card. On the
Fucking
card it says,
awesome, man.
if you're given an
unbelievable.
unreasonable demand, if your teacher wants you to do something that doesn't feel right, teacher or staff member, so let's broaden it out a bit, then ask them if they are giving you an order or simply
The Disney
a
character's
request.
right here. Her eyelash is here.
If they're
I
giving you a request,
don't see her right now. I'm gonna
ask
go
them,
move the camera
tell
around
them
and see if
that,
I can
thank
get
you
her.
very
But
much, but it doesn't
she's
feel
gonna
right
be
for
in
me
this
to do that.
area.
In other words, you're teaching them self-assertion, self-confidence skills,
that
and
direction.
command of
When I
language.
find her, I'll try
So
to
that's
crop
your
her
first,
from the other
that's
direction
sovereignty
when
for
I do.
juniors. Prototype sovereignty for juniors. If the teacher says, no, it's an order, there's no such thing as no, you've got to do as you're told. You stop asking questions. Well then, if it's an order, then I have here my invoice, my family invoice for compliance with that order. Obviously, I'm not holding an actual order up or an invoice up, but if people want to know more, they can go on my website and download the materials, the PDF. So that order will say something like, invoice for compliance, fee scheduled for compliance, £500 per minute for unlawful restrictions of movement, detentions. So it's substantial. And even if you were grown up and you were put in a police cell without lawful excuse, a former serving officer told me that you could charge £3,000 an hour.
It's not the
For
canine
false
I'm looking
imprisonment
for,
or
but it's in that
£1,000 a
same
minute if you're
area.
vulnerable. Well, a
trying
boy
to
or girl by definition is a
Get the
vulnerable
angle. I
young
may be at the
absolutely.
wrong angle.
Yeah, so we are talking about £1,000 a
So I'm
minute.
positive that's the
I've
eyelash
met the
that
system
comes out.
halfway, reduced it to £500
But right now,
a minute.
I get this one.
So
get
that's
this
your
one
first
here.
remedy in commerce. And people say, what?
I'll crop it
Commerce?
this
Why
way.
commerce? Well, schools are commercial entities. The management refer to boys and girls as units and as the product. So we are here fighting fire with fire.
Right.
So as you could say, the skeptics will say, David, it hasn't got a chance. The boy or girl won't know what they're doing. The parents will be too nervous, blah, blah, blah. I accept that. So there is backup. There's two backup strategies. And I say to them, here's a backup strategy if your mum and dad haven't given you an invoice or they don't really fully comprehend what it means to have an invoice. Ask the teacher or staff member if they're giving you a choice. If the answer is yes, then we're back to the self-confidence.
at the wrong
Thank you very
angle.
much, but no thank you. And if they say no, then we hit them with statutory remedy. It's Modern Slavery Act
Maybe it's down
2015,
Or maybe she's down
Section
here.
3, Subsection 5, modern exploitation, criminal
Here
exploitation.
she comes.
It is a crime
All right, so I
to
gotta get.
force
I'm
or
gonna
to
wait for her to
induce.
come in at a
And on
different
the
angle.
card I
And
say
I'll get her
make, because
better.
boys and girls prefer that simple language, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's a crime to make or induce in the
There
statute,
she
the
is.
language of the statute, a person, in this case a boy or girl, to
In
do
her
something
face.
against their will using threats or force.
Now that I'm noticing this too.
Right.
That's criminal.
Yeah.
Somebody has used
Thing
that
in
in the
here.
freedom movement. Someone's used that
Timeline.
to get HMRC off their back.
Cutting off the back of her face
Really?
because she's looking in that
Yeah, so
direction.
basically we're using the system. We've had this since
This whole area
2015.
gets used
The
as her
Modern
hair,
Slavery Act 2015.
which is
Nobody's
also
been
used
using
for
it.
hair
Well, it
for
has
this other
started
image
now.
that I
In
don't
the
want to
last 12
confuse you
months,
with, but
people have started to use it. It's in my course notes.
so she
So there'll
turns
be an
feminine
acceleration
down
process.
here.
Now, of course,
Uses this as an
if you're
eyelash.
dealing with the
There's her
proverbial
eyelid.
narcissist in school, and the school itself
Oops.
represents narcissism, then they will kick off because they cannot afford to give you
Just
the
right
last
above
word.
her is another eye.
So it will kick
being
off, it
used
will
also
escalate,
with
in
that
which
hairdo,
case
so
we
I don't
have
want
the ace
that's
up
not the
our
one I'm
sleeve,
going
which is
for.
international law.
I'm going for this one. Eyelid,
The
nose,
1989
mouth
UN
open,
Convention on the
cheek
Rights of
right
the
here,
Child
which happens to
say
be the
that
timeline.
all discipline in
That-
schools
that
says that
timeline
all discipline in schools, it's
I'm
Article
now getting
28,
more and more
and it's on the
familiar with.
card.
Matter
All
of
the,
fact,
everything that I'm
the
saying
same
now is on this
timeline
card,
that
the
this
school
cropper
protection card.
especially
Article
fits.
28, 1989 United Convention on the Rights of the Child, quote,
This is a
all
popular
discipline in
timeline.
schools
Seems to be
should
for me
respect
anyway.
human
Ouch, ouch.
dignity.
Oh, that fucking hurt.
Now, to my naive ears,
Oh, that
that's
fucking
game,
hurt.
set, and match. What school would want to run
I was
the risk
fucking
of
bent
being
over
reported
sideways
to
over
the
the
local
table,
press
and I
for being in
fucking
breach
pulled something.
of the United Nations Convention in effect on human rights?
Yes. Well, yes, no, I mean, absolutely. Who would? But you can sort of see a situation in which the teacher, presented with this by a child, would be at first flummoxed. What are you talking about? Look, I want you to go and do whatever it was, and if the child is brave enough to stand it out and say, is that a request or is this an order? And he says, well, of course it's an order. He's like, fine, as you say. It's £500 a minute. Happy to do it. It's £500 a minute. Thank you very much. But you can see the teacher would be either dismissing this. How would you then, if the child is then still forced by threats and menaces to go and carry out whatever it is, and he says, well, I did that for an hour, and you go, well, okay, that's £30,000. Thanks very much. How would you go ahead and then take that further so that it actually means something rather than an exercise in who's going to win the argument at that stage?
It may not be necessary to take it further. You've got witnesses in the classroom, so the boy or girl could have make a pre-arrangement with one or two of their classmates, show them the card and show them what they propose to do. You are bound to have support from at least one or two and probably a lot more than one or two. They are already rioting in schools, bless them, and so they should, because they are being deprived of, I think it's safe toilets.
So, every time it's coming and going, just so I don't have to put my cropping tool up, I'm going to allow the screen to do my cropping for me. So you'll see me keep stopping it, because my intention is to stop it somewhere around different timelines. And so that so you'll be able to see certain imagery. It won't be so collaged.
Space and permission to go to the toilet. So I think we need to be, again, apply some common sense and appreciate that boys and girls, I know a lot of boys and girls that will bite my hand off when I give them this card. Just give me that card, I'm in, I'm doing it, I'm on, I'm involved, count me in. Because we seriously underestimate the evil that is being visited upon the young ones in the classroom, and we seriously underestimate their readiness to push back against it.
What would you say when knowing children being children, that some children are going to be just belligerent and try things on because they, for whatever reason, they're lazy or they just want to say, well, I've got this card, because you hear this, you can't make me do anything. I mean, when I was at school, you had blackboard rubbers being thrown at you or whacked over the knuckles with a ruler, which, of course, is not happening now. And kids sort of know, you can't hit me, you can't touch me, and all of this, which doesn't help a cohesive, wholesome classroom to try and get through a lesson if you've got kids deliberately making it awkward for the rest of the class, and the teacher is trying to navigate a way to educate as best they can.
Can I challenge you on what you've just said? That there was a healthy dose of statism in the tone of what you've just said.
Right, okay.
My presumption is at the other end of the spectrum, based on personal experience, research for the book, and the worsening of circumstances that has been taking place in the last few years, the woke agenda, the transsexual agenda, the regenderization, the re-identification of boys and girls. My assumption now is that the classroom, there is no wholesome, cohesive culture in the classroom. It is perverse. It subverts parental authority. It subverts the journey of the boy or girl towards sovereign adulthood. And it needs to be sabotaged, and it needs to be sabotaged quite quickly. Otherwise, we're going to. I mean, we're talking about the future
we'll get
of
her
humanity.
even better at this
It
angle.
doesn't matter whether a boy or girl ultimately passes 7 GCSEs or 10 GCSEs. It doesn't matter ultimately whether they get 2 A's and a C or 2 B's and a D. It does not matter to humanity. But it does matter that they maintain their dignity and integrity and self-respect and all their gifts and talents and all the things that they could contribute to the world if they were just allowed to. So my remedy is designed to give them some kind of tool or weapon, if you like, because children are being weaponized. So we need a countermeasure because we are at war, and the main coalface, if you like, or the interface between those with malevolent intent and those with benevolent intent is now the classroom itself. Because the older ones,
still not even her,
we can look after ourselves to a greater or lesser extent. But to trap boys and girls in a prison cell known as a classroom means that we actually need powerful weaponry. And yes, the odd boy or girl.
Well, I guess my computer's crashing.
Who might turn out to be a narcissist by what you were saying. So there'll always be the odd boy or girl, just as there's always the odd grown-up who
just I got no control over and I'm hitting stuff and it's not doing
have a laugh, and abuses this strategy and abuses this tool. But I'm taking the bigger picture and I'm looking to protect the boys and girls en masse as a collective. And so if the odd one or two abuses this approach, so be it. And this is all part of the beauty of being human. We can't cater for all. You can please some of the people some of the time, etc. Yeah.
So this is absolutely fascinating, and it's really interesting to get your perspective on this. I mean, the logical conclusion, it seems to me, from what you're saying, is actually kids shouldn't be in school at all.
Correct.
And to a certain degree, I would agree with you that the system of schools that we have at the moment and the way that it has gone to where it is now is completely against children and against humanity, and is training us up to be useful drones down the end and obedient state soldiers in a way to take orders and get on with it. Yet I still think that the schooling and the teaching or imparting of knowledge is a very laudable thing, with hungry, not hungry as in physically knowledge hungry children who want to learn a subject with in a completely different environment. So you're not saying schooling in itself is a bad thing, but the structure that we have, the imprisonment, the whole thing that we seem at the moment is a terrible is a terrible way of teaching kids anything.
What I would say is that education, like vaccination, should be voluntary. If a boy or girl, if a particular boy or girl has the attitude, I can't learn from you, I will just go out into life and learn as I go along, that should be applauded, and that applies to a lot of people anyway. What we learn in life, there's a meme in my talk that shows that we learn that much from theory, so that's the textbook. We learn that much from actually, what's the pilot's living life experience. Yeah, so it's 3 or 4 times as much, and we learn that much from making mistakes.
Yeah.
Now, with classroom being a risk-averse environment, they don't allow you to make mistakes. As well as not allowing you to say no or ask why, they don't allow you to make mistakes. And being a sterile environment in which nothing ever changes and nothing ever happens, How can boys or girls learn? So what happens, and I should know because it happened to me, they leave school with an aversion to learning.
Yes. Yes, I mean, I totally agree with you there. And as somebody who at my school years, I left at 15. As soon as I could get out of school, that was it. There was no way I was going into any secondary education. And it's only then that I started to learn. And I found learning not a chore, you know, and got into my first job, which was in printing, and you're being told this is a print machine. You're going, wow, look at that, and it prints. Oh, I never knew that. How does that? And you're just inquisitive, and you know, you're sort of going, wow, and can you? And you're asking a million questions, and they're going, blimey, this bloke's enthusiastic, and you know, I kept the job, which was great. But not only is the school this rigid, narcissistic system, but unfortunately the whole environment outside of your house, with the way that the government is running its rules, is bad, and what they're proposing with all these other things is even worse. And so we're all at a bit of a loss, you know. It's not just the school anymore in which you're being ordered about, but we're getting it from everywhere. With when you simply get into a car, there's all these rules that you've got to abide by, these infringements where nobody's been hurt or harmed, that suddenly you're paying for because you've inadvertently driven into a hashed area on the ground, or you know, there's so many. You've parked your car slightly off on the yellow line or something, and it's just slightly off there. Oh no, there's a ticket. Sorry, that's another infringement. We're in a society that's penalising us almost for breathing, and not complying with the rules and regulations. How do we get around that?
Well, again, it's back to being the individual sovereign. A lot of people say, oh, I need more people to show me the way, and I need more people. Well, that's not sovereign thinking. If you get back into your heart and you know who you are and you know the difference between right and wrong, something else that's left out of the curriculum, the difference between right and wrong. So that will guide you through the maze that is